Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Ellen Lewis. This is Crazy for You, Lunchtime Live, and I am so happy that you could join me today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about gauge. Gauge. I think it's a concept that really still mystifies a lot of knitters. I know it's confusing for my beginning knitters, but it's come up in my first sweater class that a lot of fairly experienced knitters are not exactly sure what to do about gauge and really kind of how to think about it and how to understand it. So I wanted to kind of give an overview today about what gauge is and sort of how to think about gauge. So this is a very quick 15 minutes. All right, so gauge is really just an independent way of talking about the size of your stitches. A designer can say all kinds of things in the pattern, like what size needle she used, or what yarn she used, or what stitches she used. But the way to be sure to translate what the designer did to what you're able to replicate and your ability to make something that's the same size and shape as the designer made is gauge. So gauge is simply how big or small your stitches are. It's a way of measuring the size of your stitches. And those stitches are typically measured in the number of them per inch. So you'll hear gauge talked about in terms of 4 stitches per inch or 5 stitches per inch, or over 4 inches, which conveniently is just about the same as 10 centimeters, which is why you'll see 4 centimeters and 10 centimeters listed, 4 inches and 10 centimeters listed as your various gauge measures. So it might say something like 5 stitches per inch, or it might say 20 stitches over 4 inches, which is the same as 5 stitches per inch, right? So 5 stitches per inch times 4 inches is 20 stitches per inch. Are you with me? Good. So part of what we want to think about when we think about gauge is it's a little counterintuitive. So if you have a gauge of, say, 8 stitches per inch, those stitches are really small. That's a big gauge. It's a high gauge number, but the stitches are small. So gauge is how many stitches will fit in an inch or in 4 inches. So the more stitches that fit in a given measurement, the smaller each stitch is. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but I think it's sort of important to kind of understand that. So obviously, like a sock is going to use a very fine yarn. The stitches are going to be small, the needles are going to be small, and you're going to get a very dense fabric with a very high number of stitches in an inch. Whereas a really chunky yarn might have, 2.5 stitches per inch or 3 stitches per inch, right? Or 12 stitches over 4 inches. So it's a smaller gauge. The number, you would agree that 12 is smaller than 32, which is 8 stitches per inch is 32 stitches over 4 inches, and 12 stitches over 4 inches is smaller. So the number is smaller, but the gauge is thicker. Do you follow me? Let me know if this makes sense. Hi, B. How are you? So the larger the gauge number, the smaller the stitch. So that's one piece of it. But the other piece that's sort of come up in this class is if you're trying to match the designer's gauge, like let's say the designer has designed something that's 20 stitches over 4 inches, and you cast on and you measure your gauge and you find that your gauge is 16 stitches over 4 inches. Okay, you need your gauge to be larger. Okay, you need it to be 20 and it's currently 16. So it's very tempting to think, okay, I need my gauge to be larger. I'm going to use a larger needle. But no, you have to remember that the larger the gauge number, the smaller the stitches. So if your gauge has a lower number per inch or per 4 inch than the gauge that you're trying to achieve in a pattern, then you need to go down a needle size or two, so that you need to make each stitch smaller so that more of them will fit in. Conversely, if you're trying to if the designer wants you to have a gauge of 20 stitches per 4 inches and you cast on and you've got 23 stitches per 4 inches, you want your gauge to be smaller. You want each stitch to be larger, so you need to use a larger needle. I hope that makes sense. I know that just in talking about it, sometimes it's sort of circular and confusing, but I do think it's really kind of important to understand how you control your fabric with your needle size. Yes, you got gauge. So, all right, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. Anybody out there struggle with gauge, with understanding it, with achieving it, or have any specific questions about gauge? Go ahead and tell me in the comments if you do. It's just something that you kind of get used to. And I do think generally, I mean, I'm a sweater knitter. I like to knit sweaters. So gauge is pretty important in making sure that the sweater is going to fit you. And another piece about gauge is with sweaters, I think it's important that you work at a fabric that you like, that you work the gauge and the knitting and the sweater at a feel that you're creating a fabric you like. So if you have a pattern and it calls for, I use this example, 20 stitches to 4 inches, because that's just a standard worsted gauge, but it could be anything. So let's say the gauge of the sweater is 20 stitches per 4 inches, and you have a yarn that you really like, and you swatch it, and it comes out to be really different. So it's either like 24 or 23 stitches per 4 inches, or it's, say, 16 stitches per 4 inches. If your gauge that you are getting is small, like say it's 16 stitches to 4 inches, you would have to use a much smaller needle to increase the gauge that you have. Okay, you would have to go down several needle sizes. And I think it's important to do that because what you might find out is that you don't like the fabric that you're creating. Yes, you're able to get gauge. Yes, you're able to make that yarn fit into that gauge, but it's not a fabric that you would be comfortable wearing. Do you see what I'm saying? So, I mean, if you've got a sweater that you expect to be kind of comfortable and easy, and you are cramming a really thick yarn into a gauge that's really small, you're going to find that the fabric is too stiff and it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to knit, and it's not comfortable to wear. The other, at the other end of it is if you have a fine yarn and you want to knit that at, like, normally it would be knit at like a sport weight yarn, and you're going to try to make it at 20 stitches to 4 inches. You might find that the fabric is too floppy, too loose, that your stitches look sloppy, uneven. And it's not because it's not because you've done anything wrong with your knitting. It's because that yarn is really too fine to hold itself together at the gauge you're trying to make it. It's just not suited for that particular gauge. So that's the importance of swatching, and I think that's just kind of a little bit of an overview on gauge. And I hope that that is helpful to you. I would invite you to have a look at the My First Sweater class, because we do talk about that quite a bit, and it's a really nice and easy class for you to sort of play with gauge and learn and understand in the context of a sweater that you're going to be knitting to fit you. So that's a kind of a fun thing. And that's really all I had to share with you today. I'm going to be in the shop, and I'm excited. Ginny's going to be there, and we're going to help someone do a custom fit measurement. So that's always good. A sweater that fits you perfectly based on your measurements. So I'm looking forward to doing that today. What else? What's on your agenda today? Anything fun and exciting going on for you? Okay, well, I won't take any more of your time, but I look forward to seeing you again soon, and thanks for joining me. Have a great day.